Welcome to Portals of Perception and to a continued exploration with Jeff Vander Clute, a spiritual teacher and guide, the author of Beyond Every Teaching, and a partnering agency in this experiment we called Distilling from the Epoch Culmination Journey right after we landed the 4-day event. And Jeff, we just finished recording the exploration through the story of a life, the appreciation that we reach a configuration of qualities and essences, the understanding of the compensatory act that produces that expresses the ghost behavior of the psychology of a soul, and it led us into the appreciation of the inner conclave and the many different characters and voices we can bring to life in the inner conclave conversation, the inner conclave contemplation, as both a healing and a managing of life's pressure technology and a way to contemplate about the meaning of life and purpose and the universe at large. Any bridging comment you'd offer from that, as we intend in this conversation to first explore the context of why we are about to talk about the golden shadow and the guru-student double trap, and put the context and then embark on that story and journey. Any bridging that you will offer to this?
I'm as interested as the listener to hear where we are headed.
Okay.
I don't exactly know, so I can't create the bridge.
Okay. So, 2 layers of context. So we did earlier in this 4-day journey this work where we said we reframed shadow work in understanding the soul psychology that develops a compensatory act because of the quality it has been separated from, the essence it has been separated from. And so we did that on day 2. And on day 3, we decided to embark on now the collective dimension of that. What happens when we are in groups of people? So often could be talked about as collective shadow. In this case, again, we reframe it in the bigger context of what happens when we, as a group of people, as a community of people, as a nation of people, as humanity at large, what are the collective patterns that we would want to recognize that produce painful kind of behavior? And can we map a taxonomy of some of the key patterns of that collective ghost behavior? So when we started that, the question that was presented was, where do we begin? So now it's about 150 people, different experiences in life and journey, but imagine that many would have 30 or 40 or more than 40 years in various community endeavors. So I estimate we had in the space somewhere between 5,000 to 6,000 years of communal experience. And the first question that was presented is, so what is the entry point we want to use for this research, for this discovery exploration? And I'm not going to bring the loom, but we brought a loom that had 20 different options. Obvious option, do we want to research collective ghost behavior in families dynamic? The answer was not on this occasion. It's a fascinating work. There's a lot of work on it in the world, but that would be a specific case. So we chose to go elsewhere. Do we want to focus on anything else in more the historic sense, tribal cultures? That would be very interesting, but it will need more anthropological research, and it will give us the distance that perhaps we didn't want on this occasion. It will be looking at it out there. Do we want to research this through your favorite reality TV? Because the whole phenomenon of reality TV coming as a new genre into the media space, a little before the advent of social media, was actually, for us, in the evidence that Universalis is on setting and nearby, bringing the shadow, bringing the ghost into the surface, is just an evidence that all those, they offer fantastic research if you want to use that. I said we could research this through an investigatory inquiry about the kibbutz movement in Israel. I was born and raised in one. I am highly aware of the typology and the ghost behavior and the collective shadow, to use again this term, in this movement. Do we want to use it by observing political parties on the left or on the right? There are large human systems that represent those kind of behavior. We've obviously chosen to not take these approaches because it would become a way of projecting it outside of us. Do we want to look at some of the most popular bands in history? The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Fans, and so on and so forth. Do we want to look at the US Congress, the British Parliament, the Israeli Knesset, and do the research? We can do all of the above. Do we want to look at competing wars between different Zen schools and or between different religious courts, Hasidic courts in the Jewish tradition? These spaces would be so rich, for example, when we go to become diagnostic of the nature of the ghost behavior codified earlier in the previous century in the idea of the narcissism of small differences. What is this phenomenon? Well, sometimes groups that are very close, they are 99.999 the same in their belief system, but they have one or two differences. And they will fight each other tooth and nail and go to extreme behavior with each other. What is it? And what is the typology of building identity on the one smallest difference? So we did a whole body of work around that. Obviously, we've chosen a different path than this, and we said, can we look broadly at the category of communal endeavors, communities throughout history, maybe the last 3 or 4 centuries, that had a developmental inclination, a spiritual inclination, an evolutionary inclination. Many people did this research and came through different backgrounds and different communal endeavors. Can we look at this as a space that we can inquire into to do the work of diagnosing those patterns, what we call below the line, and then what are the above the line opportunities? And there was a 3-step brief, describe what does it look like, that pattern, and following the similar brief of what we did before, what could be the higher development or the higher voice or the higher truth concealed by that shadow slash ghost behavior? I'll give an example in a minute. And how can it be disarmed? Now, there was one moment when we just wanted to name what are all the ghost behaviors. So with 5,000 years of communal experience, we've had one of the most hilarious, liberating, therapeutic, cleansing kind of sessions. For about 20 minutes, half an hour, we may be named, must have been 60 or 70 voices, just named names of patterns. The beauty of this experience is what we described in our previous conversation as the reversal. when you get to reverse from the subject to the object. So one of the practices to facilitate accelerated reversal is naming with no explanation. Just name a pattern, give it a name without a charge, without any feeling associated. There is a certain clinical, it's almost running a heart surgery, psychospiritual heart surgery in a collective environment with others. And doing so, again, is world work. How can we facilitate a mutualized ecology, a mutualized space as an agency for that, since we are not sitting in the United Nations, since we are not sitting in the US Congress, since we are not sitting in the British Parliament, since we are not sitting in other places of power in large corporations or other spaces where you could do this work, we can do this work on ourselves here, and in that way we bring to life the possibility of it for others. And now I'm sharing it with you, so it's going to be on YouTube. And that was the body of work. And what I'm about to go with you into was an add-on later, a specific dimension with it in relation to the student-teacher journey. But let me just pause here to give you a chance to reflect on taking what we've done before in the individual case and looking at it in the communal context.
Well, there's a phrase you used which might perfectly represent the shift from the individual to the collective opportunity, and that is psycho-spiritual heart surgery. And I'm seeing that the same processes, the same protocols, the same wisdom that we are lovingly bringing to bear upon the individual challenges of a lifetime can be deployed for collective psycho-spiritual heart surgery to hopefully heal, unblock, reconstitute a healthy global heart.
And the experience can be quite cathartic when we do so, because there is truly, if we could visualize it, truly, as to use the word you just applied there, a way to reconstitute a collective heart in the process. There is an energetic reconstitution that takes place when we truly transmogrify that experience. Whether we can see that energetic form or not is a different question. We get to feel it, we get to experience it. So let me now bring, so that was a context. And the other context, as I bring the slide, was the idea that we have entered a post-guru phase. And we're soon, this will be published after we do this, but we're going to run a Portals event that talks about the post-guru quest and the 3 octaves of life. And why I say we have entered the post-guru quest, because in the bigger context is in the journey that you and I have been mapping about the rise, the activation and the rise of Homo Universalis, the universalis human, our capacity to graduate from the polarity of planetary life to the multiplicity of universal life. Inside this journey, we are also, as you said earlier in your comment on the previous episode, once we give rise to the inner conclave, we become that universalis on the inside. So we become our own guru, we become our own teacher. And so a very important tone and ethos for the entire epoch journey community is self-responsibility. We are each self-responsible. We are each fully responsible to take ownership of our own self-regulation, to become agentic, that is to have agency in our own self-regulation and in our own self-alignment. There is no one person who holds the truth and knows better than you what's right for you. All of those are central to the ethos of a more enlightened way to approach and endeavor to metabolize these spaces in a communal, mutualized space. So it was in that context that we said, well, can we reflect on the teacher's journey and the double guru-student trap and the golden shadow? Anything else that's arising for you just in response to what I said now before I dive in?
This is extremely timely. One of my favorite organizations, so I'll give a shout out to the Association for Spiritual Integrity, is exploring how to navigate in a healthy way the relationships that arise in a spiritual community, especially the teacher-student relationships. And as we shift to a new story of spirituality, which has been foretold by Thich Nhat Hanh and others, we shift into a collective sangha, a collective teacher. And there's wisdom that arises in different ways. And this is what's coming to me now, but to be available to these new ways, we sort of need to clean up the ways that we're familiar with so we can say thank you very much, move out of the various traps. I probably stepped in them all, and or just about, and enter a new space of possibility for the species.
Indeed. So with this, let us embark on the teacher's journey. To appreciate the teacher's journey, I first borrow the appreciation of the epicenter and the hypocenter. We've had in recent times some major earthquakes. When there is a tremor, there is the epicenter of that quake. That's the point on the face of the earth that the tremor was releasing its power. And there is the hypocenter, which is the place deep, deep down below the tectonic plates where that energetic source was released. So I use this to not talk about earthquakes, but as a metaphor to invite the frame of mind that there is the epicenter, that's where the forces of life manifest. And imagine the hypocenter as the originating source, deep inside the earth or deep somewhere else in the universe. And I use this to describe that every great teacher was once an inspired pilgrim. They were on a quest to travel from the epicenter, from where they experienced life, where the drama and the ups and downs and the confusion and the turmoil and the tribulations of life catalyzed them to want to discover the hypocenter, the point where life originates, to make some direct contact, some direct communion with the source of it all, to find the ultimate ineffable source. Every teacher was once a pilgrim on that journey. And then, as they traveled to seek to find, sometimes through other teachers, sometimes through extreme physical hardship, sometimes through years of meditation, in whatever way, through whatever traditions, that inspired pilgrim, the singular focus they brought to making direct contact with the source, with the truth, with the cause, with the essence, with the esoteric core, that persistent devotional petition to become a vessel for it is what summoned that source to reveal itself, to impart its power, and then adopt and recast the pilgrim in their image. So that singular intention was the fashioning catalyst. And then, as a result of that, we can begin to see a scenario where that pilgrim has now been, to a degree, initiated by the essence, sometime with the help of others, another teacher, but I'm now focusing as though this is the first ever initiate, to build the appreciation of the journey. So they've been initiated by the essence, by which we mean some of that luminous presence of that source, that ineffable source, is now imbuing them on the inside. She or he may still carry all the eccentricities of human life. They have not necessarily resolved all those pains and struggles, but they now have something else that permeates them. And that essence, that source, emanates through them as a feeling, as a form of knowing, as a connection, as a somatic experience, as a state, as an enhanced, blissful state of possibility. And at this point, they feel it on the inside, and still it is yet to be confirmed or validated. It is purely an interior personal experience. I'll do one more step in the story and then invite your comment on this. And then they are faced with that choice. First was the journey to discover and make contact with the ineffable source, where their petition summoned that response that imparted to them revelation and knowing. Now they face a second choice. They are confronted with, do I stay in containment in the cave, in my own private space, to grow the presence, to grow the source, to become even more illumined on the inside, or do I travel back to the epicenter to grow the light within while I'm propagating and growing it in the world? Let me pause in this suspenseful moment in the teacher's journey to invite your reflection from your experience. You're a teacher, so in some ways you've had this experience in your own way. What would you speak to from your experience or from your study of the space?
You said something very important on the previous slide in the last paragraph, which is there is a knowing, there is a realization, and it has yet to be confirmed experientially. And I would say a great way to realize the confirmation, not just the knowing, which could be abstract, to imbibe life and the experiences that life brings through interactions with students, through interactions with anyone on the street. And to bring oneself into contact with the world is perhaps the most powerful way, not only to be confirmed in what one knows. You can think of the world as the playground for one's spirituality, and more than that, the testing ground, but also to go deeper. And not only be in the cave from time to time, but to become the cave. So there's no longer a need to go off to the cave. That happens when the inner and the outer are reconciled, unified, and ultimately seamlessly integrated.
Okay, so
we need the world.
So you just accelerated through the next 7 or 8 slides, which is perfectly natural and all right. And I'm now going to slow down the conversation to actually walk us through the step-by-step experience. So indeed, if that pilgrim decides to journey back to life and return the quote-unquote to the world, to interact with people of all walks of life, to experience the discovery on the inside and to begin to fashion it, they then must realize that to return to the epicenter, to serve as an enlightened teacher, that second journey must be fashioned. Because first, there was a lonely search, which led to being found and being filled with some inner glow of that ineffable source. Now, to bring the source to fuller realization, the teacher must go through that second transformation. And the second transformation involves codifying some of the experience, codifying some of the revelation, the essence, the presence that turned up into a transferable media. It may be a language, a teaching, an art, piece of art, whatever it is, something that would be transferable for acquiring students. So we are at this point with recognizing that the original petition of the pilgrim activated a purpose. That purpose has now gathered people around. And this process now is now being fashioned into a transferable teaching product, which is the expression of that source. And what we're seeing is that there are 3 octaves now in the process. Actually 4. There is the ineffable source, there is the teacher in formation, in discovery, there is the product of the teaching that's coming out of the teacher, and there is the people that gather around the body of work and the teacher in the hope to make contact with that source. So students gather around the teacher, in part hoping to fill the inner void with a presence. So obviously, I'm describing here a general archetypal story that would qualify both to Eastern traditions and the many variations there of variety of schools and teachings, and to Western traditions of mystery schools and initiatory experiences. And I'm making an overarching case for them. And so they seek to, and the more I speak in these terms, the clearer it becomes with current generations why we are in the post-guru phase and why it is now that the collective will ultimately, the resolution of the story is that the collective, the mutualized ecology, the mutualized distributed body of people that we can become the teaching agency, but we are not yet getting to the resolution. I just wanted to impart the conclusion midway through the story to in a way give that sense. Now, so with student gathering around the teacher, the source is validated. It's not just the teacher is validated, the source, that initial contact, that initial communion is validated, and the teacher's charisma grows, right? It grows, and because of the siphoning action of the students and their struggles and their inquiries, they induct more from the source to find the teacher. So the teacher loves the circumstance because that is forcing the teacher to become more clear about his own body of work and revelation. Okay, so through the teacher, the students feel and intuit what they longed to find and join, consciously or unconsciously. The desire to contact directly a higher source, which they intuited must be there, and their own higher nature. So that's what we addressed earlier in the previous episode. Because people experienced that separating event, we all walk through life seeking to rejoin our natural configuration. Sometime we see the access for it through a teacher, which a hint will become the material of the golden shadow. Up until now, the teacher was in communion with Source, which gave the teacher purpose and power. Now the teacher begins to, for the first time, deal with the content of the student's projection. They project love, they project admiration, they project a desire to get close. All the qualities that they seek to find in themselves, presence, strength, vitality, intimacy, care, flow, all of these qualities they seek to find through, in this circumstance, the teacher, which is part of what leads to some of the, as you said, the search in communities to find the ethical ways to guarantee that communities do not misunderstand the mechanics of this process. Okay, so now the student, one more thing happens. The student typically have heard from the teacher his journey or her journey and experience. And instinctively, intuitively, they emulate the original petition the teacher made in his own inner conclave to the ineffable source. The teacher found a way to surrender to that ineffable source. The student emulate that by presenting initial surrender to instruction, which has an important formative function in facilitating the building of foundational linings of trust and connection, and is partly the reason for the historic traditions in one way in the East, another way in the West, why some of those behaviors were often part of Zen schools and initiatory mystery experiences, where the student believed, and the teacher sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly believed, there has to be some kind of surrendering quality. Ultimately, the invisible anatomy of the experience is to facilitate those sentiments and beliefs, to enable transmission and transference. This is where a lot of the pathologies also happen to arise. Because the initial surrender, I'm a little ahead of myself in these slides here, so let me just go there and explain that this is truly the way where people project the idealized versions of themselves. They confuse the perfect nature that they intuit about the ineffable source and see the teacher to be perfect. Because they project that becomes the golden shadow around the teacher, as the teacher is the object of the student's disowned, projected, idealized self. Again, whatever quality it is, and hence the golden shadow. So I wanted to come to this slide before I go deeper on the pathologies that I started to describe. But this is the classic journey. You've seen it, you've studied it, you've observed it. What would you say to this? The so far so good. And I'm now saying, now if they are not discerningly wise, the double guru-student trap enters. But before we proceed there, anything you say to this?
It's very helpful. And I look forward to seeing this, sharing this in the ASI, or Association for Spiritual Integrity community, if and when that seems appropriate to you. And you said so far so good. I know we're going to get to the other side of that statement. There's so much positivity and love and joy and success. And then there seems to be a threshold where if one isn't aware, that inflation reaches such a point that the unresolved bits of the teacher's psyche become large. It's almost like a magnifying glass. And the teacher who has done so much healing and awakening work has truly resolved a great deal. And yet, as there are more and more students and there's more gravitas, more induction, as you said, the magnifying glass gets stronger and stronger, and the little unresolved pieces become significant. So it's important to know that there's always going to be something that will eventually appear with the magnification, hence the need for the discerning wisdom at the next stage.
Indeed, I would offer almost a categoric statement, which is, for as long as we are in the flesh, we have unfinished business that we need to attend to, whatever the degree of enlightenment of a teacher is. So nobody is exonerated, nobody is absolved from continuing to work to attend to these spaces. As we said, so far so good. if they are not discerningly wise, the double guru-student trap enters. I will actually update this by saying, as I just said, the trap is there already. It's always ever present. And unless we continually work with it, we are captured by the ghostly behaviors, the ghostly patterns of this trap. For as long as we are in the flesh, even when we feel that we have worked through all our disowned content, there will always be more patterns that with greater power and with greater intensity and with greater illumination will come to the surface. And that's actually by design, because if you think about it through the perspective of the universe, saying, okay, you all are saying and intimating that you're ready, we're going to give you some more power here. Let's ratchet up the amperage, please. And let's ratchet up the amperage again. Because ultimately, this is about us as human beings learning to handle power safely. Before we can become universalized, where the power levels will intensify even more, we go through the 1,000,001 testing steps through life and experience. By the way, what I'm describing now, the same happens in any organization. You qualify for certain responsibilities, so you now take that responsibility, and when you are demonstrated that you are safe with that responsibility, you can be given the next responsibility. So by definition, you always step into a level of responsibility that you are almost ready for, but not quite. And you will time and again, if you are attuned in your own journey, you will be exposing in yourself opportunity areas, outage areas that, oh, I need to do more work here. It's like Benjamin Franklin saying at the end of his life, I've taken these three qualities, these three virtues, to spend a week with each one. I think I've every year, so 13 times 4 means I took every virtue through the 4 seasons of my life every year. And he said, I believe I've attained and accomplished all of them quite well, which means I have still work to do in the humility space. Aren't we all? So if it was good enough for Benjamin Franklin, it's as far as I'm concerned, it's good enough for anybody else. So and no comparison whatsoever. Let's begin with the student trap and then travel to the teacher's trap. So the student trap. It's a very interesting story. So the students now draw nearer the teacher, only to discover that the teacher is actually a human being. An imperfect, possibly eccentric, quirky human. Because if they were not a little bit eccentric, highly unlikely that they embarked on that journey in the first place. So they now, for the first time, see that intuition they had of that ineffable source and the teacher, they are not one and the same. The teacher is, a little eccentric. And therefore, they realize for the first time that the teacher cannot match the projected golden shadow, and that leads to the disillusionment crisis. Now, what I'm describing here in some way is a central feature of the human experience, even in the child-parent relationship. We each, as children, we had the first moment when we said, well, my father, my mother, hopefully a little later than earlier, and there was, okay, they are a human being too. They are flawed in their way. They have their weaknesses. They have their... And many of us experienced it very early in childhood. Some of us, it came later. So there is a disillusionment crisis the student now experiences in relation to the teacher. And they realize that those qualities that they projected from what it was that they were separated from, they now need to be initiated into their own work to reintegrate and to disarm the ghost pattern without expecting the teacher to do it for them. Again, we are focusing right now on the student side of the equation. So to survive the disillusionment crisis, the student must develop their own center of gravity and generation. If you like to use a bit of a Gurdjieffian gesture here, they need to evolve from moons receiving the sunlight all the way from the sun, but through the medium of the planetary realm, they need to evolve from moons to planets. So that's why I'm drawing now. They now begin to have their own center of gravity, their own energy field, their own auric space, even when they are in the presence of the teacher. So that the genuflecting surrender, it has to be transmogrified to some kind of a respectful, but not completely differential to the point of abdicating one's own responsibility. There is, I realize as a student, I must now take fuller responsibility to my own journey. In a minute, we'll speak about the work the teacher must do to enable that. And we also now see that because some recognize the teacher's human flaws and imperfections, they use in some cases that as a necessary individuation process to reject the teacher. Rejecting the teacher is just the polarity of the ultimate surrender to the teacher. It doesn't actually mean having developed the integration, but some need to go through this phase to say, this teacher is an asshole or a jerk. I'm no longer ever come next to them because they have now seen what they haven't seen before. In deeper psychological work, we understand that that means they are angry about the part of themselves that they disowned in the first place, that they refused to metabolize, which they projected on the teacher, and now as a mechanism, as a process of reintegrating that part for themselves, they need to, in the first place, project their anger or resentment or what they disown, the below the line property of that, to the teacher as a medium of producing the escape velocity. And also, in many cases, they need to do so because there is such a pathological conduct around the teacher or the teaching or the communal context that they actually need to develop an escape power, and sometime they will do it in this way. There are also those teachers who use the fuel of disillusionment to actually develop their own potentized inquiry to seek contact with the ineffable source for themselves. Now, obviously, enlightened communities will encourage that in the first place. That is actually the whole point of teaching, not to center around the teacher, but to center around finding the body of work in the way it emerges in your own journey and experience. The actuality of it is that in many situations there are the symbiotic scenario of the teacher wanting to have the students still dependent on the teacher, and the students preferring to be in that dependency relationship as well, which is part of the pathology that emerges rather than individuating each and every one to their own liberation. So that was the student trap. Let me pause here before I move to the teacher's trap and offer you space for comments.
It's well said, and I'm seeing the value of the dysfunction, interesting, in bringing attention and awareness to the higher potential for the teaching and for the teacher. And as you said, if we start with the goal of empowering, enabling everyone to have their own source connection, source realization, it does flow more smoothly. And if there's dissonance, that's a great indication that maybe it's time to be doing more of that. Maybe it wasn't time before. So the dissonance is valuable, extremely so. And I'm thinking in my own experience of people who have worked with me for a while, and we could say perhaps become a bit dependent upon my sourcing capacity. And then something starts to feel off. And I have, especially recently, been offering more tools so people can source for themselves, which is to say, tap into their own innate, fundamental wisdom and not need to ask me. In fact, life has very conveniently provided a reason to do this even more, not in the form of dissonance, fortunately, because maybe there's enough awareness, but just as a practical matter, I'm about to go away to India, into the high mountains for some weeks, at least 2, but maybe as many as 6, during which time I will not be as available. So it serves everyone really well to have the capacity and the self-responsibility. So anyway, I appreciate the process.
Indeed, and that's why also, Jeff, in communities of practice, there is a special place for all that invites the awareness and the somatic and the psychospiritual ecology of practices that bring about more agentic interior conduct in your own inner conclave. For example, what's a way in which you can be completely receptive to teaching, to receiving, even receiving a transmission, and do so while you're still tethered inside your own agentic self? What's a way for you to be tethered in 2 places more than just in 1 place? Because part of the dynamics in the presence of charismatic teacher, or it doesn't always have to be a teacher, even the communal presence and field by itself can, in certain scenarios, tend to make people less tethered in themselves. How do you facilitate that? So a whole body of practices, ecology of practices, to tether somatically, to tether psychologically, to tether in one's emotional calibration, energetic calibration. How do we facilitate that as part of an evolving journey of a gathering of people? Suggesting that when we do this better, again, we proffer the intelligence of it to people in other spaces where that at all is not the focus. But I work with leadership teams all over the world. They invite me to help them make more enlightened decisions about their strategy and about their innovation. And I'm there present with a group of people who have no interest and no knowledge of what we are exploring here. But I can be with a team, as I've been a few weeks ago with a team in Silicon Valley, and I can see all the pathologies that similar to what happens in capturing a group mind, capturing the team mind, and how the loud voices influence others, and what might be a way to bring other ideas. So what I'm suggesting here is circling back to what I said in the beginning. There is adjacent work to what we do here in other spaces. Naturally, we were with a community of people that is their area of inquiry: development, evolution, personal evolution, collective evolution, the spiritual dimensions of life. And there is a way in which we can offer our collective mutualized awareness as a space to metabolize these awarenesses, and in a way offering that to whoever, wherever is receptive to these kind of awarenesses. So now, let us proceed to the teacher's trap. The teacher's trap is that as the student projects their love and admiration, the teacher struggles to separate that counter-transference, that projection, from the flow, the initial flow from the ineffable source. Because in some strange way, there are certain similarities. The ineffable source carried the luminosity of love and intimacy and flow and tremendous vitality. And now, what happened in the first place was that the students' openness and interest actually augmented the flow from the ineffable source. It facilitated a larger dispensation field. The transmission the teacher perhaps experienced became more potent and more versatile and more flowing. But it also begins to get mixed with that projected content. So the teacher now begins to struggle because by taking in and making the mistake of identifying with the love and the admiration of the student, because the love and the admiration in the first place is yes to the teacher, but in the broader human context, it is that they seek that something else, universal in nature, ineffable, invisible in nature, which is to do with the causing realms, the blessing realms, for which the teacher is simply serving as a conduit, as a medium, assisting the students to find that source. So the teacher may begin to imperil his or her attunement to the ineffable source when they begin to identify with the return projection from the students. So this is ultimately the risk. The risk is if the teacher identifies with a projection and with the polarity of the projection, on the one side with the love and the admiration, and also then with the criticism, with the fault finding, with the resentment, whether they identify with any side of that, the risk is that because they begin to be more attuned to their students rather than to their purpose or to their mission or to the cause they decided to serve or to the ineffable source, whatever way you want to name it, obviously the main traditions, benefit of the main traditions is in many ways this has been attempted to be addressed in the various scriptural giftings through the generations, where there is so-called perennial wisdom offered about it. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the main tradition have as much shadow and as much ghost behavior or more in some of the most inner holy of holies and the most sacred places, because people think that the tradition, and I'm quite deliberately not naming here to not go into conflict with any one of the major religions, but I'm obviously including all the major religions, including all of them, including those that feel that they are more immune to these, because in all cases, the teacher, the priest, the rabbi, the lama, you name it, they need to do the work of, do I enroll myself back in the initial journey that catalyzed in me the first inspiration, or have I made a mistake to identify with the love and the admiration that I receive from other people, replacing that connection and attunement and substituting it ultimately becoming the golden shadow that becomes the point of failing and became a point of failing for many, many teachers. So this is, I have just the one final slide of resolution, but I'll pause here to give you a chance to comment on this.
Thank you, Aviv. You made a categorical statement earlier, so I'll follow your example and say that there is a point at which any spiritual teacher, even the great ones that we might think of as completely infallible representatives of the absolute, there's a point where with enough fame, enough loving projection, enough worldly imprint, whatever is that little microscopic bit of unresolved egoic identification that gets magnified because now there's a big community, and so there's some additional magnification power, it's going to arise. And so we've seen so many teachers fall during their careers, and then recently, and it's a sad story that it repeats so often, is shocking. Recently, many of the seemingly untouchable teachers, the perfect ones, stories have come out, let's say. And it's disheartening for those communities to realize posthumously that their teacher is not perfect. So I really welcome the opportunity for all of us to explore, more or less continuously, our relationship with our teacher. And if one is a teacher, one is still a student. We're learning from our students. We're always learning from that which is upstream of us. I've found that a really helpful metaphor is what seems to be in quotes upstream and what seems to be downstream. So in this model of octaves, the source, the candle, is maximally upstream, and to remember the upstream, stay always in sacred devotion to the upstream, while remaining in sacred service to those who are still working their way up the mountain, so to speak. They're students, but even if we're teachers, we're still works in progress, and humility is necessary. So this model allows us to remain humble.
And the other implicit revelation in this is, if in the previous conversation we focused on the personal journey to discover the ghost patterns of that compensatory act in the fixation of one's soul in its desire to rejoin source. And if in this exploration we focus on the adjacent ghost-like, shadow-like patterns of the relationship inside a community and between students and teachers, the third dimension that's forever remained almost out of touch, but we now need to integrate into the exploration, is so relationship between me and me. That's the first area I'm exploring to enlighten myself. Relationship between me and others in communities and potentially with teachers is the second area. And thirdly is, what are the ghost-like behaviors, the shadow that we still hold on to in relationship between self and power and self and the sacred. So that is the sacred, next sacred work is, I think you used the earlier in the conversation or the previous one, the idea of defragmenting, defragmenting and discovering what are the patterns we still bring into association with power, association with anything that's sacred, anything that for us is elevated to specialness. The 3,000 years psychology, cumulative human race psychology about this, how we as humans and the species evolved with these realms. How do we not throw the baby with the bathtub water? Is there a way to reconsecrate life, embrace the blessing and the causing realms, and see those realms and the human realm as a partnering relationship? Those realms do not need us humans to be genuflecting, to be lesser than the fuller partners. They depend on us as much as we depend on them to gain life. And so therefore, to overcome both traps, the ecosystem needs to evolve. I'm proposing a distributed agentic process. And a distributed agentic process, an ecology, is one where self-authorship, self-responsibility, self-regulation is the ensouling work, the ensouling step. As we seek to spiritualize the universe, we do the ensouling work to make ourselves safe vessels for ourselves, with each other, and with the sacred, because the sacred can only feel safe with us to the degree that we are safe with ourselves and with each other. Or else the sacred will back off because we become a contaminated ecology. And when I say contaminated ecology, I don't mean us humans becoming pure. I mean us purifying forever in sentiments, which means for as long as we are in the flesh, we recognize we have work to do. We are a work in progress all the way through to the veil. And guess what? Even on the other side. One very clumsy starter visual descriptor for a distributed, mutualized scenario is this. So we have the ineffable souls, which I'm just metaphorically presenting here with a candlelight. And we are seeing that the light is inside each person. It doesn't mean everybody is all in the same place. One of the pathologies of communities who decided to do away with teachers, to do away with and bounce to the other side of the polarity, is there is never going to be any internal structure, because all structure leads to pathologies, and all pathologies lead to a corruptible scenario. And what you have are scenarios where there is no distribution of power, where there are no roles and functions. And as we know, the shadow element or the ghost dimensions express itself in the absence of real manifested structure that around which there is agreement, or some kind of a dynamic, shape-shifting, facilitative functions where people come and go, so nothing is too permanent, and different people get to experience different roles and functions, and everybody is stepping into function. In the absence of that, what you have is a hidden power structures that shape and manipulate the dynamic, which is as pathological as anything else. So that's just the other trap that some communities found themselves in, because they have prevented themselves from, or held back from, more fully metabolizing their journey. What I'm trying to depict here is, yeah, sure, there will be journey guides. There will be healers. There will be instructors for a particular kind of art domain. And then when we move into the kitchen to cook together dinner, somebody else is going to lead the proceeding because they have the know-how. And the following morning, we're going to work in the garden. Somebody else is going to lead that activity because they bring the know-how there. And so on and so forth, rather than thinking that all the know-how, all the knowledge is with one place. And yet again, in this case, I serve in the capacity of a Sherpa. That's the role I'm in. I'm just Sherpaing, facilitating the journey. And sometimes I'm doing the storytelling. And the storytelling is an invitation for myself, for you, Jeff, for any one of us, to continue to embrace the journey. So I'll leave you to make the final comment on this, what I'm trying to intimate and proposing in this invitation, in this image of a mutualized ecology of practitioners, all together on a journey of realizing the greater luminous possibility of human life.
Hear, hear. Well, the issue clearly isn't to structure or not to structure. It's not even an issue. The opportunity is to create liberating structures rather than limiting structures. The structures that have served that are more centralized around an individual teacher, they do serve to a point. Collectively, we've reached a point where we need new organizing principles. We need to realize our awakened collectivity. We are in the process of realizing what it means to be a superorganism, where there is distributed agency in conscious relationship with the rest of itself as a higher order whole. And it is precisely the higher order whole and intelligence that has the intelligence and the know-how and the emergent qualities and capacities to address the great challenges of our time. So to make this super relevant, what's perhaps the biggest challenge that we face planetarily? Could it be climate change? Could it be the various planetary boundaries that have been transgressed by our massive power as a species? Yet the power to date has been largely unconscious and therefore destructive. So coming together and liberating awakened structures of agency gives us awakened power to create an age, maybe it's the Holocene, where yes, we have the keys to planetary well-being, and we have the wisdom to steward this global garden that we inhabit together.
Beautifully said, Jeff. Thank you. So yes, indeed, what about that emergent capacity? And how do we facilitate and bring some of it to the structures that still need to facilitate the operation of the global scene, the global systems, the national systems? What from this work, the remaining inquiry, open inquiry, which we proceeded to on the last day and we will not go into here, was, well, what can this teach us about the large transition that humanity is now facing, where we see that all systems and structures of power have reached an obsolescence breakdown point? How are we as humans to evolve those systems? Because that's what the project of the next decade or 2 decades is about. Can we, not everybody will enter a communal endeavor of a spiritual or developmental kind, but what from this exploration is relevant to the US Congress, to the United Nations, to the British Parliament, to the Israeli Knesset, to the many hearts and minds of people who are trying to lead global causes such as energy, such as new economic models, such as climate, such as social justice, and so on and so forth. How can these issues be better addressed with more enlightened leadership that is better, wiser, more ready to metabolize power and distribute power? And our premise is we need more people accessing the agentic intelligence of being a fully responsible, alone decisive, self-regulating human being. That was the premise. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Aviv.